Good afternoon. Welcome at the joint event of the Republikon Institute and the Center for Economic Transition Analysis, Autonomy and Trade. Today we are going to, my name is Dániel Mikecz, I'm the senior researcher of Republikon Institute, and today we are going to discuss the economic transition in the Visegrad 4 countries, and especially we are going to focus on the recent developments, how the war in the Ukraine, what kind of impact the war in the Ukraine had on the economies of the V4 countries. And our partner organization, the Center for Economic Transition and Analysis, just published an analysis on this topic. They analyzed the common features of the economies for the Visegrad 4 countries. And today at this online event, we are going to discuss this publication, the research findings. And we have here Aleš Rod. Hi, Aleš, who is going to represent the Center for Economic Transition and Analysis. And
thank you very much.
And as a discussant, Máté Hajba is going to share his thoughts on the publication and on this topic. And first, I'd like to ask you, Aleš, to share with us the findings, the results of your research and of the publication. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you guys for invitation. It's I'm very happy and glad that you are interested in our work. So I will just briefly introduce the study with a quite brief presentation, just a few slides. We did a study called Policies Reducing the EU Reliance on International Trade. Because we are interested of the strategic autonomy and of the V4 economies, and we think that EU policies that are adopted by European Commission and implemented into the national economies, member states of the European Union, that they are not homogeneous and they have various impacts of individual countries. And that could be a problem because the same direction, same regulation could have another impact on the strong Western economy like Germany or France, and another impact on small and open economy in the transition process, like the Czech Republic, or like Hungary, or like Slovakia, or like Poland. So that was the topic of our analysis. We think that, and find out that V4 economies are more vulnerable to policies aimed at reducing European Union's reliance on the international trade. Because we saw that several big directions dealing with digital economy, dealing with big tech, dealing with data and using of data, dealing with Internet of Things and other big topics are trying to reduce the openness of the European economy. And we know that the structure of V4 countries is quite unique within the European Union because we historically adopted more or less laissez-faire approach to the economy because we wanted to invite third parties' capital for building the market economy after the collapse of the Iron Curtain and of communist regime. And we wanted surely rapidly trying to catch up Western EU countries, since this was the only option how to be competitive and how to cooperate with these developed countries to provide them and their to their companies good conditions for doing business in V4 countries. This has determined our position, and therefore we find out that V4 countries are more vulnerable to policies, reducing this reliance of international trade, let's say, to do business with USA, to do business with China, to do business with Latin America, but especially, let's say, Asia and North America, because reducing the reliance on international trade could generate higher costs for V4 countries than for the founding members of the EU. That's what was said a few minutes ago, that France or Germany or Spain or Italy could handle in better way with these regulations because they have strong national providers. But in the Czech Republic or in Slovakia, we have not, especially in digital services. So we are relying on these third parties companies, these big tech companies outside of the European Union. And this is particularly important as the European Commission is pushing for major policies under its strategic autonomy agenda, whose exact purpose is to reduce reliance on international trade. Surely we know that war on Ukraine, that Russian attack on Ukraine has started some processes thinking about strategic autonomy, but we as a V4 countries should bear in mind that limiting of international trade could be very harmful for us. Yeah. So that's very important that we are not seeking for like infant industry protection or some rent-seeking activities for V4 countries or some subsidies and more EU funds to V4 countries. But we know that open economies like the Czech one, Hungarian one, Slovak one, or Polish one are more beneficial from the international trade than some strong economies in Western Europe. That was shown by the index. Its methodology was that we sum up several important criteria, macroeconomic criteria, like GDP per capita, Human Development Index, imports of services per capita, DESI Index, this Digital Economy and Society Index, Foreign Direct Investments Restrictiveness Index, Effective Corporate Tax Rate, Trade Openness, Global Competitiveness Index, Foreign Direct Investment Inward Flows, and we rank it as a Olympic medal ranking, which means that if you are the best in this rank, you got 22 points, and if you are the worst one, you got just 1 point. Yeah, and the higher the score, the lower the vulnerability, surely. And in the graph, we can see that V4 countries like Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, and Slovak are systematically worse than founding members of the EU. Not just in total score, which is shown on the graph, but also in individual items, individual criteria. So that's what we have to bear in mind when talking about the EU regulations. That, as I said, and I will that will be my last sentence of my presentation. The impacts of EU regulations are not homogeneous because countries of the EU are not homogeneous. And when talking about vulnerability to limiting international trade, open economies with a lot of industry, with a lot of business relations in the world, like V4 countries, could be harmed more than the economies with a strong national economy, strong national providers, and a strong national agenda, which is randomly set up in Brussels or Strasbourg. So that's just basically the frame of the presentation. Thank you very much for that. Those are my contacts for some maybe thoughts or questions after this stream. We are open to debate it, and let's discuss. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alex. It was a very interesting presentation, and I think we can really discuss it because it puts actually the in context these recent developments in European, especially when it comes to the economy of the Visegrad 4 countries. I'd like to ask Máté to reflect on the findings of the study. Máté, please.
Thank you very much. So I found the study very interesting, and I agree with all the points therein. However, I would like to raise the question that there are two sides of the coin, and there is one trade regulation or interference from an EU side going on vis-a-vis the United States and its protectionism, and there is another that's been a response to the war in Ukraine. And I think the two have different implications. The war in Ukraine is more of a moral issue where Russia is being ostracized for its actions in Ukraine, whereas the developing trade war with the US is more of a protectionist policy. In some cases, the other topic of Ukraine is more harmful in short term for the EU economy, and I think that's been recognized. However, it's a small setback that the EU is willing to take in order to be completely independent of Russia. And I think when Russia first invaded Ukraine in the Crimean crisis and the first war in Donbass in 2014, there were talks about energy independence from Russia. However, the popular support was not big enough back then for the countries in the EU to act. However, with the most recent war, I think that the upheaval against Russian aggression and the atrocities committed in Ukraine generated enough support that most of the EU countries agreed that energy independence from Russia and trade restrictions with Russia is called for. So I think that's another topic that I think it was high time to be more independent of the Russian energy sector, and it's very difficult for some cases, and mostly in the V4 countries that's been historically been interested in trade with Russia. Russia, or back then the Soviet Union, having a big sphere of interest over the region, and of course the Russian foreign policy is still wanting to exercise influence over the region. And for example, in the case of Hungary, the Hungarian government has deliberately paid more and more emphasis on siding with Russia when buying energy. And for example, there's an investment in the Hungarian nuclear sector for a nuclear power plant being built or not being built. We don't know yet. In the case of Paks, that's the Hungarian nuclear power plant, and that would create a lot of investments, but we don't really know the exact details of the deal and how much Russia could manipulate the energy prices. So that's problematic on one side, but it's been going on for a lot of time, and Hungary deliberately built its dependency on Russia because it was in a short term more beneficial. However, now it created a difficult situation for Hungary that trying to be dependent of Russia would cost a lot of money because it's difficult for a landlocked country to import energy. to the country itself. So Hungary has been siding with Russia in many cases. In the EU, vetoing some sanctions or communicating that it vetoed sanctions, despite the fact that it sometimes didn't, because Russia can manipulate Hungary through the economic sector and through the energy sector. And it's really difficult for Hungary, for economic reasons and for foreign policy reasons, to be independent of Russia. So despite the fact that a lot of countries were willing to take a short-term disadvantages from being independent, they did so for moral reasons and for support of Ukraine. Hungary, as of yet, failed to be very decisive in doing so. The other topic is the developing trade war with the US, which is another case, and I agree that the region is very vulnerable to the limitation of foreign investments. However, for example, in the case of Hungary, the Hungarian government, in a surprise move, sided with Brussels in saying that, for example, European corporations or businesses needed more support from the EU as a response to the US limitations. That being said, Hungary is playing an interesting game with foreign investments. They had a strategy called the Eastern Opening, where a lot of taxpayers' money were pumped into trying to attract investors from Asia, mostly from the Russian sphere of interest, which didn't really work as well. But now there are some Asian foreign investments. For example, one of the largest foreign investors in Hungary is South Korea, with some battery factories are probably being opened. However, there's a lot of backlash against this. So it's an interesting topic on how Hungary is maneuvering in this sphere and how interest can change. And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, Hungary is the most corrupt country in the EU. So corruption plays a lot in this game. The problem is that what I didn't really agree with in the study is saying that the V4 countries are more laissez-faire. I think it used to be the case, and the methodology definitely proved this. However, I think there's an additional layer saying that when the Hungarian government, and I'm sure it's not only the Hungarian government that does that, when they are attracting foreign investors, big corporations that are more of a strategic interest because they create a lot of jobs, they get a lot of taxpayers' money. So they are not there as a laissez-faire or just purely by market forces, but they get a lot of government funding, and because of a lot of corruption, in this case, politicians can say that, okay, but you have to sublet or subcontract to this and this company, and I think it's more of a crony capital. So it's based on a laissez-faire approach because the corporate tax is small, but they will sidetrack it with crony capitalism. I think that's also a problem. So I think, although I agree with the fact that the EU should be more open trade, I think there should also be regulation on crony capitalism rather than free trade.
Okay. Thank you. I totally agree with mostly everything you said. Firstly, please do not mix this conclusions of the study with total support to Ukraine. This is not the study which should somehow defend the approach, which should be some kind of friendly or pragmatically moved toward Russia. I think that business war and sanctions against Russia are totally right now, and we have to be as much free from Russian relations, about these business relations with business limitations as possible, especially in energy sector. I would say that the situation in Hungary is very similar to Czech Republic. We have no sea, so we are totally dependent on pipes with oil from Russia and with gas from Russia. So we are we are right now, the Czech government is under the big constructing decision-making how to substitute Russian energy commodities from all over the world, let's say, and it's totally right. What was meant, and we specifically meant, and you touch it in your reaction, is these high-level digital services as a support of the Industry 4.0, and this all new revolution of industries like cloud services, like IT, cyber security, and other things, which could be very problematic from the small, especially like middle-sized and small-sized company, to get good providers if there are some like shocked and not some, let's say, step by step done, but like shock regulations limiting the approach to the services. Yeah, so that was especially meant by that, and we know that the discussion we are under right now about autonomy, strategic autonomy of the European Union, are misused by some interest groups trying to seek for bigger rents, because those providers are quite strong to cover like half of the Europe with the services. But we know that small countries with a small number of inhabitants, and like Czech Republic, for example, it's not the case of, maybe not the case of Hungary, maybe not the case of Poland, but Czech Republic and Slovak Republic I would say first on the plate. So we will wait for these like best solutions, like 1 year or 2 years, because there is not enough money and no enough people to provide this for the whole Europe. So I would say that we should bear in mind that especially some processes of, if not total competition, the processes of potential competition, which could lead to similar impact like total competition, are very important, because like oligopolies on the European market are not good for customers, especially not from the CE region, which not enough money to compete with Western countries. Yeah, so that was the topic, and surely we know that if there are some like complications with discussions about that, because fairly saying, this is not the idea or proposal or opinion which is not usually mixed with this pro-Russian activist or some slightly pro-Russian activist or pro-China activism and so on. So we have to like we as the authors of the study have to be clear that we would like to conclude and like highlight just the idea. Please let's analyze it in the wider frame, and not just be like very quick and very rush in this opinion making, because that's not efficient. Yeah, so that's like my reaction, but thank you for that. And I mean, you totally, and I think you totally like understand the context of the study. So thank you once again for interest in it.
And I just want to add that I didn't mean that the study was in any way pro-Russian. I meant that the case of Ukraine would be, I think, a short-term setback for the EU economy, because it's a moral issue rather than a pragmatic issue. which is, I think, necessary. And there are other issues where I disagree with the EU's limitation of free trade, all the more so because the V4 region is, for example, in the case of digitalization or Industry 4.0, is not as developed as other countries, for example, in Western Europe. And for example, the V4 is mostly a manufacturing country where, for example, Hungary has a lot of car manufacturing or battery factories, but R&D is not being done in the region, but rather than for example, in Germany or in other cases. So limiting digitalization and as such would be more harmful for the region, simply because of the fact that bigger companies do Industry 4.0 elsewhere. They are multinational companies. They use the region for manufacturing, and they can do research development, big data analysis, and so on elsewhere. However, the smaller businesses and SMEs, for example, are really behind the digital development in the region. A lot of SMEs, for example, in Hungary, are still not present adequately online. They are still not using online platforms as efficiently as it would benefit them. And that's also down to digital literacy, which is developing in the region, but not in the same level as for example, we have not reached the same level as EU member states in the West. And I think that for this reason, the digital market or regulations in the digital market and digital trade would really negatively affect the region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. We, as a very industry-based economy, as you said, with a lot of manufacturing in regions which are not quite competitive, like Prague, for example, we have to bear in mind that digitalization and this like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and all these processes are very necessary step to stay competitive and attractive for young people to stay in these regions. Like it has not just like macroeconomic aspects, but also microeconomic aspects and distribution and wealth within the country. So I think that like accessibility of the best technologies, the best possible technologies is very important. So what was meant by the study was that we, for countries and other like small and maybe economically not so rich, not so developed countries, should bear in mind that we have to keep our access to this best possible technologies to stay competitive. Yeah, because like the freezing status quo of development of individual countries in the Czech Republic would not be beneficial for us, and it could raise political populism in our countries. We in the Czech Republic has a quite new and strong experience from last governmental election cycle. I think that you could write the books about political populism in Hungary, in Slovakia. We just see that those elections would be like very difficult for democratic like way of the democratic direction of the country and Slovakian politics, I would say. So this is also necessary to keep in mind. Yeah, that the step one, which is some regulation in Brussels, could lead to step not 2 or 3, but 4 or 5, which could be the rise of the foolish political populism in these regions and the stabilization of the whole EU region, which is not good for us, and it's just very good for Russia and other countries which are not in friendly relation with the European Union right now.
I have 2 points to raise on what you said, and I really like the fact that you mentioned that the region needs the best technology possible, and not the most accessible, but the best, because I was going to raise the question of China and its interference in the Internet of Things. So there's been a lot of concern raised that a lot of electronic goods that are connected to the Internet of Things have at least some Chinese parts, Chinese microchips, and so on. China's ability to get data from these things is really worrisome. Even in the military sector of the West, there are some Chinese manufactured components. And of course, China is not playing by the regulations, so they can contravene the regulations in the EU. But I think that's a topic to monitor, that China should play by the rules or not manufacture goods to the EU, because that would undermine security. And the other thing you mentioned about populism, and I think that's an interesting one, because the EU is undermining itself by the protectionist regulations, because if it will negatively affect a region that's fragile from the point of view of the EU, for example, there are some anti-EU propaganda going on in Hungary, not to the point of Euroscepticism yet, but anything that can be blamed on the EU, whether it's justified or not, will be blamed on the EU. And if the quality of life of people or businesses will fall, it will be the fault of the EU from the government propaganda's point of view. And it's a really tough job of the EU itself, because I don't think the EU is communicating its successes well enough, because it's giving away a lot of money in cohesion funds and everything, and the region really developed due to the EU, which was not, I don't think the EU took enough credit from it, because it's really hard to communicate. However, whenever something goes wrong, it's always much more the fault of the EU than it actually is. So the negatives are more apparent in the EU than the positives, even though there are a lot of positives, but it's not well communicated. However, the negatives are exacerbated by anti-EU voices.
Yeah, I totally understand, and I agree that China and its influence is a big topic, especially in telecommunications, and it's also under the quite strong focus right now in the Czech Republic. I'd just 2 things which were already mentioned. First one is that shock changes are quite harmful for economies and society as well. And the worst thing is not the cost, but unexpected cost. Yeah. So I totally agree that it's beneficial to be very careful, to be very open to debate about restrictions and possible regulations, and cost benefit, and do good regulatory impact assessment of all changes. But I usually say that the worst thing is not the cost, but unexpected cost, as I said before. So all these segments of the markets, like telecommunications or healthcare or automotive and others, should know what will be the step of the regulation and when, what are the goals, and how the goals will be measured, because if not, it's just not that like data-based, but feeling-based regulation, which is always bad, and it leads to unexpected impacts of the regulation to these Peltzman effects, which is also bad. So like we know that, for example, in Czech Republic, China and Chinese parts of the telco infrastructure should take like 1 billion euros to be changed by other technologies. And we as economists know that if all the countries in Europe right now decide to do that, it will lead to total blackout, because there is not enough of the infrastructure, of the services, of the manufacturers, of the suppliers able to cover this inflow of new demand. So we have to be like very careful with these political decisions, surely, but it does not mean that we shouldn't think about it, and we shouldn't be like shy to make strong decisions. Yeah, but like I'm not politician. I'm not telco expert. I'm just economist, and I know that like these economic shocks are very, very harmful themselves. Yeah.
But I think what you mentioned about economic shocks is that I don't think the current proposals and the actual regulations on trade could have come, for example, 4 years ago, because there was a COVID pandemic, which really hindered trade because of the way it impacted global travel. So the EU itself suffered a crisis of one of the core benefits of the EU was free trade and free travel, which was restricted due to health reasons. But that meant that people got used to restrictions. So it basically prepared the ground for further regulations on trade, and people were more, if not acceptive of the fact, but they were more neutral on it because there was a reason for this to happen for their own health. And now other reasons can be found, but by the time they were used to it happening before. And I think that was the political side, but on the economic side, I think it couldn't come at a worse time because there was also the shock of the pandemic, where there were, besides the lot of negatives economically, for example, the limitation on trade, the very, very few benefits was that people adopted very quickly and digitalization took off, really. So the automatization and digitalization were skyrocketing basically, and the digital literacy, digital solutions were really quickly responding to the fact that there were lockdowns and they were needed. However, with digitalization being regulated, restricted more, it could harm these quick developments. And I understand the regulatory side, that because digitalization took off really quickly during the pandemic, it needed reaction from regulators. However, I think reactive regulation rather than proactive regulation that's allowing development rather than restriction development is not necessarily the good way.
Thank you very much, Máté. I'm asking Aleš if you want to reply on Máté's last comment. Well, if not, I think it's we had a lively, exciting, interesting discussion. I was just thinking about, when you've been discussing this issue, if the economic policies in the region, and there's something which I call the new protectionism, and I think it was also apparent during the COVID pandemic. And I wonder if that's somehow politically driven or not. But during this conversation, there was a lot about it. So I think I learned also a lot. Thank you for presenting your results, Aleš, from the study on autonomy and trade in the Visegrad countries from the Center for Economic Transition Analysis. And thank you very much for Máté Hajba for discussing this publication, the results of Aleš's institution, and of this whole issue. I hope that in the near future we are going to have more opportunity to discuss economic policies in the Visegrad region. Thank you very much for being with us. This was an event organized by the Center for Economic Transition Analysis from the Czech Republic and by the Republikon Institute from Hungary. Please join us next time when we have an online or an offline event. Stay tuned and follow the updates on our social media account on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much,
for the opportunity.
Goodbye.